still been endeavouring to understand the nature of emptiness. But it's also been said that we have to dive deep into that ocean of oneness that is often used to describe Satchitananda. But before telling two little stories, there are several little anecdotes. One of them a personal anecdote. In the time before going to Divine Mother in Hawaii was a very intense time for me. I had been with the Yogi Master and I was meditating many hours a day. But across from the estate in which we lived was a caldera, a little crater, volcanic crater. But in that crater most of the trees were dead. But I would often go across there to meditate, and one day I was sitting in front of this very beautiful tree, devoid of any leaves, and I was weeping for the tree. I felt such an affinity and oneness with this tree, and all of a sudden it spoke to me in this rather haughty voice. It's something like, "Don't cry for me. Under the earth, my roots are entwined with all living roots. I am alive." And then the other little anecdote is about Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna, when he was dying with cancer of his throat, his followers were gathered around him, begging him to eat from a bowl of soft curd. And he looked around at them and he said, "Why should I eat when I'm eating through so many mouths?" And then we know Mullah Nasruddin. He was a very well-known pundit and mystic and joker, and he's still around us all over the place, in many places. But there was one attribute of Mullah Nasruddin, and that was he wasn't very good with money. So it so happened that his creditors caught up with him, and they stripped his house. His house was bare, as his creditors tried to get recompense. So there was Mullah Nasruddin, standing in his empty house, bewailing his fate, when he knelt down in the middle of his empty living room and put his turbaned head on the floor. Just then, 3 men came by. They'd come from a distant place. They happened to be looking for a new imam for their freshly finished mosque, and they'd heard about Mullah Nasruddin. So when they looked in the window and saw this figure with his head on the floor, they thought to themselves, "Oh, what a pious man this is." So they knocked on the door and they went in to the mullah. But one of the first questions they asked him after the greetings that usually go on between the men at that time, they said to the mullah, "Where is your furniture?" Well, of course, the mullah is well known that he always answered a question with a question. So he said to the men, "Well, where is your furniture?" And the men said, "Well, we're just travellers, we're just passing through." Well, the mullah, not wanting to let them know the real reason why his house was bare, he said, "Well, I'm just a traveller passing through too." Well, just then the mullah had to go off to his neighbour's house to try to beg some food that he could entertain his guest with. And while they were away, the 3 men would say, "What a pious man this is. What a high-flown man. Look at this man. Here he is. He obviously has no attachment to worldly things, knowing that our life is transient." So, of course, when the mullah came back, the 3 men bowed down before him and begged, "Please come and be the imam of our new mosque." And he did, of course. It was another phase of the mullah's life. And then there's a story of a very penurious man. He had a large family. Times were bad. He'd worked as a wood chopper, he'd worked as a cobbler, he'd worked as a porter, trying to support his brood. But, times were very tough, and day after day he would go out, and he would not be able to find any work. Well, on another day such as this, he went off to try to find some kind of menial task that he could earn enough crust to feed his family. But by the end of the day, dusk had fallen, and he still had not found any kind of work at all. So, of course, it was too late for him to make his way back to his house, so he had to find a place for him to rest for the night. And it so happened that he found a little aperture, a little cave. And in the moonlight, in the cave, he looked up and there was a blind owl. The blind owl had its beak open, and the man observed that moths and flies and insects flew into the owl's mouth, and when it was full, the owl would close his mouth and swallow. Well, the man thought to himself, well, if the Lord can feed a blind owl in this way, surely he will provide for a son of man. So he went back to his house the next day. He climbed up into his bunk, and when his wife told him to come down, saying that he should go off and find work, he refused. He said, no, I'm staying here. The Lord will provide. And just then there was a knock on the door. And when the wife opened the door, it was two rough-looking men, and they asked her, do you have a donkey to rent? Well, the woman said, yes, but what do you want to bathe the donkey with? And they said, oh, we've got vegetables we have, backpack that we have. So the woman loaned the donkey to the two men who went off, and as it so happened, they went off to meet a companion. They had found a treasure trove, and they divided the treasure trove amongst them and packed it into the saddlebags of the donkey. But left behind was the golden tureen in which the treasure had been stored, and they couldn't decide amongst them who was going to get that. So they argued, and then they drew their knives and fought. So they finished up killing one another. But in the meantime, they'd packed radishes and potatoes on top of the treasure to cover it over. But when the three men lay dead, the donkey, finding himself at a loose end, of course, just made his way home. And when he came to the gate, the wife came out and opened the gate, and there she observed that the backpack of the donkey was filled with vegetables. So she quickly went and roused her husband to come down and see what the Lord had provided for them. And there was great rejoicing, and the man said, well, let's have a look, what kind of it. So, of course, when they took the vegetables up, here was all of this gold and gems and all. Well, he immediately went out and bought a feast for his family, and of course they lived quite well from that time on. So, when we put these anecdotes and these several little stories together, remembering that we are endeavoring to understand the nature of emptiness and becoming more and more aware of this nature in ourselves, therefore giving us the means of being able to comprehend what emptiness itself is. Because like these anecdotes, we're talking about the dead tree and the great saint Ramakrishna. What does it mean, a dead tree and a dying man who can say, why need I eat when I can eat through so many mouths? What is it about us now?
It's we can feel everything and we are one. So
Yes,
everything
but what's
that
behind it? What is behind this now? When we're looking at emptiness and feeling this in our lives is space. And we might call it receptivity. Or listening. Even listening, isn't it? Just listening in itself is that spaciousness, isn't it? No thoughts, no projections, just listening. Not being. Isn't it? So putting it together with these anecdotes and these stories, what is it about you now? That gives us a gleaning of what this gateless gate is. What is emptiness?
Notion of the I.
Yes, absolutely. That's a prerequisite.
Can you repeat, please?
So it's a dissolution of the I, you know, the I, the me.
And that we know is in a state of Satchidananda, isn't it? Because in that state, there's no I at all, not present. So these are prerequisites. The absence of self, and that state of integration of those three levels, dimensions of life. But there we come to this gateless gate. How do we go together, these anecdotes and these